Marcus Johnson was looking forward to a normal, peaceful Thursday afternoon. He had spent the day teaching his students, guiding them through lessons, and watching their faces light up when they understood something new. Teaching had always been more than just a job for Marcus, it was a way to make a difference in his community. Yet, as much as he loved his work, he felt the same tiredness many teachers did at the end of a long day. His body ached from standing for hours, and his mind craved rest. But more than anything, he was eager to see his children. Picking them up from daycare was always a highlight of his day. Their laughter, their endless curiosity, and the way they ran to him as soon as they saw him never failed to lift his spirits. He stepped into his car, a modest gray sedan that he had bought used a few years ago. It wasn't flashy, but it ran well, and it had gotten him from place to place without trouble. As he drove through his familiar neighborhood, the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the streets. Children were playing outside, neighbors were chatting on porches, and for a moment, everything seemed ordinary and calm. Marcus hummed a tune softly to himself, letting his mind drift to thoughts of dinner and bedtime stories with his kids. Suddenly, a flash of blue light appeared in his rearview mirror. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't unusual to see police cars in the neighborhood, they patrolled regularly, and Marcus knew that sometimes officers pulled over drivers for minor mistakes. Still, seeing the lights made him instinctively tense. He signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. The car behind him slowed and continued on its way, leaving him alone with the approaching officer. The officer, a man in his early 40s, approached with a serious expression. Marcus rolled down his window and tried to keep his voice calm and polite. "Good afternoon, officer," he said. "Is there a problem?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He looked at Marcus for a long moment, scanning the car and Marcus himself in a way that felt more like suspicion than routine checking. Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had been stopped before, for things like expired tags or a missing turn signal, but there was always a professional tone. This time, it felt different. The officer's eyes narrowed, and his lips pressed together tightly, as if Marcus had already done something wrong simply by being there. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer finally asked. His voice was sharp, almost accusatory. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, officer. I'm not sure. Was I speeding?" The officer did not answer right away. Instead, he leaned slightly closer to the car, as if trying to see something through the tinted windows. Marcus could feel the tension rising. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, making sure not to make any sudden movements. Every lesson he had ever taught about staying calm during stressful situations now seemed to apply to him personally. As the officer circled the car, Marcus noticed small details that added to his discomfort. The way the officer's hand hovered near his belt, the way he glanced at Marcus's license and registration repeatedly, and the almost imperceptible shake in his voice as he asked questions all contributed to a growing sense of unease. Marcus wondered if he was being treated this way because of something as simple as his appearance. He didn't want to think that the color of his skin mattered, but deep down, he felt the fear many others in his community had described in stories and articles. Marcus kept his voice steady. "I have my license and registration right here, officer," he said, reaching slowly into his wallet. He handed over the documents carefully, making sure his movements were visible. The officer took them, barely glancing at them before returning to pacing around the car. Time seemed to stretch. What Marcus expected to be a 5-minute stop was turning into something heavier, more uncertain. He watched the officer's body language, trying to guess what was going through his mind, but it was impossible. The officer occasionally muttered something under his breath, words Marcus couldn't quite hear, but the tone made his stomach tighten. Meanwhile, life on the street continued around them. Children still played on the sidewalks, neighbors walked their dogs, and a cyclist passed by, nodding politely at Marcus as he sat in his car. It was a strange contrast, the world outside moving normally while Marcus's world had shrunk to the space between his car and the officer standing outside. He wondered if anyone passing by could tell how tense he felt or how quickly his mind raced with what-if scenarios. Marcus thought about his children again. What would they think if he didn't come home that evening? What would his spouse think if something went wrong during this stop? These thoughts made him even more careful with his words and actions. He reminded himself that staying calm was not just about politeness, it was about safety. Finally, the officer spoke again, his voice slightly less harsh but still commanding. "Step out of the car," he said. Marcus hesitated for only a moment, then opened the door and stepped onto the pavement. His hands remained visible at all times. The officer asked him questions about where he lived, what he did for a living, and if he had any prior encounters with the police. Marcus answered honestly, keeping his tone neutral, careful not to add any hint of sarcasm or frustration. As the questions continued, Marcus began to notice patterns. The officer seemed to assume the worst about him from the start. He wasn't asking for clarity, he was looking for confirmation of a suspicion that didn't exist. Marcus thought about other drivers he had seen pulled over before. They had been treated with courtesy, given a warning, or sent on their way quickly. He couldn't help but wonder why the stop felt so different. Even though the situation was stressful, Marcus's instincts as a teacher, someone used to observing carefully, noticing small details, and thinking critically, helped him remain composed. He noted the officer's movements, the words he chose, and the way he looked at him. Marcus realized that the stop was more than a traffic enforcement moment, it was a window into something larger, something he had read about but never experienced firsthand. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Marcus kept reminding himself to breathe slowly, to think rationally, and to remain polite. Every time the officer's hand moved near his belt or his tone sharpened, Marcus felt a jolt of fear but countered it with calm. He remembered advice he had once read about handling stressful encounters with authority: stay visible, stay respectful, and stay aware. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street, Marcus realized that he needed to be careful not only for himself but also for the people who cared about him. One wrong word, one sudden movement, could escalate the situation. He continued to answer the officer's questions without hesitation, without defensiveness, and without raising his voice. At that moment, Marcus understood something profound. This was not just a traffic stop. It was an experience that would shape how he saw the world, how he understood authority, and how he would approach similar situations in the future. It was a reminder of vulnerability, of the need for awareness, and of the importance of staying calm under pressure. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the officer stepped back and sighed. Marcus's heart was still racing, but he felt a small wave of relief. He had made it through the first stage of the stop without incident, but he also knew that the encounter was far from over. There was a larger story here, a deeper truth about how people were treated based on things they could not change, and Marcus felt a mix of fear, frustration, and determination. As Marcus got back into his car, he glanced around the street one more time. Life was continuing outside, oblivious to the tension he had just experienced. But for Marcus, the world had shifted slightly. He understood that even ordinary moments like a drive home from work could reveal extraordinary truths about society, fairness, and justice. And as he started the car and slowly merged back into traffic, Marcus silently promised himself that he would remember every detail of this stop. Not just for him, but for the people in his community who might one day face similar experiences. This ordinary Thursday had turned into a moment of clarity, a moment that would stay with him forever. Marcus had barely settled back into his car when he realized that the traffic stop was far from over. The officer's behavior during the first few minutes had left him uneasy, and now he could see it more clearly. While his car sat still on the side of the street, the officer's gaze followed him like a shadow, sharp and unrelenting. Marcus tried to stay calm, reminding himself that he had already done everything right, kept his hands visible, followed instructions, and answered all questions honestly. Still, the tension in the air made it hard to breathe normally. The officer returned to the driver's side window, his face tight and serious. He asked Marcus to step out of the car again, and Marcus complied without hesitation. As he stepped onto the pavement, he could feel the heat of the afternoon sun pressing down, though it was nothing compared to the heat of anxiety rising in his chest. The officer's tone was direct, but now it carried something more than just authority. There was a sharpness, almost a suspicion, that made Marcus feel as though he were being judged not for what he had done but for who he was. "Do you know why I'm asking you all these questions?" the officer said, his voice steady but pointed. Marcus shook his head. "No, officer," he replied. "I just want to understand." The officer didn't respond directly. Instead, he began asking Marcus about his home, his job, and his day. On any ordinary stop, Marcus might have found these questions routine or polite. But here, every question carried an undertone of judgment. The officer's eyes flicked quickly toward Marcus's hands, his pockets, and the car's interior, as if looking for a sign of guilt. Marcus noticed the subtle differences compared to other stops he had seen or read about. In those, officers had treated drivers with a basic level of courtesy, asking questions politely and offering explanations. Here, every word, every gesture seemed designed to intimidate. Marcus kept his answers calm and clear. "I work as a teacher at Lincoln Elementary," he said. "I pick up my kids from daycare every Thursday after work. I have my ID and registration right here." He handed the documents over carefully, making sure the officer could see his hands at all times. The officer took the papers, scanning them quickly. Then he asked, "Have you ever been stopped before?" Marcus considered the question for a moment. "Yes, a few times," he replied. "Mostly for minor things like expired tags or a broken brake light. I've always cooperated." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped back slightly and began pacing around the car. Marcus watched carefully, noting each step, each glance, each subtle movement. He could feel the tension in his shoulders growing, but he refused to show it outwardly. He remembered advice from community workshops about dealing with stressful encounters with police: stay calm, stay visible, stay aware. He repeated the advice silently in his head, like a mantra, trying to keep his heart from racing too fast. Other drivers passed by on the street, glancing at the scene but not stopping. Some slowed down, curious about what was happening. Marcus noticed the faint whispers of conversation in the distance, the subtle exchange of glances between neighbors. It was a small audience, but even their presence made the situation feel heavier. He wondered if anyone else had noticed the subtle signs of bias he was beginning to feel. The officer returned to the window, leaning slightly forward. "Where exactly do you live?" he asked. Marcus gave his street name and house number, his voice steady. The officer scribbled something in his notebook but didn't make a comment. Instead, he continued with a series of rapid questions, jumping from one topic to another without warning. Marcus answered each question honestly, keeping his tone polite and his expressions neutral. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. What had started as a simple traffic stop now felt like an interrogation. Marcus could feel his pulse in his ears and the heat rising in his face, but he refused to let it show. He knew that any display of anger or frustration could escalate the situation. Instead, he focused on small details around him: the sound of children playing a few blocks away, the hum of cars passing by, the faint rustle of leaves in the trees. These small, ordinary things helped him ground himself and maintain a sense of control. The officer's next question hit a nerve. "Do you know why people like you often get pulled over?" he said. Marcus paused, unsure how to respond without anger or confrontation. The question implied judgment, an assumption about him based on something he could not change. He took a slow breath. "I'm not sure, officer. I try to follow the law and be careful on the road." The officer didn't answer. He simply stared for a moment, then walked back toward his car. Marcus could feel the tension building again. He wondered if the stop would end without incident or if it would escalate further. His mind raced with what-ifs, thinking about worst-case scenarios, and yet he kept reminding himself to stay calm. As Marcus waited, he noticed something else: how differently he was being treated compared to others. A few days ago, he had seen a neighbor pulled over for the exact same minor infraction, and the officer had been polite, quick, and professional. There had been no long questioning, no suspicious glances, no aggressive tone. The contrast was striking, and Marcus began to understand that this encounter was about more than traffic rules. There was an underlying bias at work, subtle but unmistakable. He tried to focus on the small things he could control. He made sure his hands were always visible. He avoided sudden movements. He spoke clearly and politely. And he tried to remember that, despite the stress, he had the right to remain safe and calm. Then the officer returned with a different approach. He began questioning Marcus about his friends, his past encounters with law enforcement, and other personal details. Marcus answered as honestly as possible, keeping his responses short and to the point. He noticed the officer taking notes, the rapid flick of the pen across the paper, the way his eyes seemed to scan Marcus for any sign of deception. Marcus's mind was full of thoughts. Why was this happening to him? Was it because of the car he drove? The neighborhood he lived in? Or was it simply because of who he was? These questions weighed heavily, but Marcus refused to let them overwhelm him. He focused instead on the simple facts: his job, his family, his day-to-day life, and on the knowledge that he had done nothing wrong. Minutes passed like hours. Marcus felt the sweat beginning to form on his forehead, the stiffness in his shoulders, and the tension in his chest. Yet, he also felt a quiet determination growing inside him. He knew that his calmness, his composure, and his honesty were his strongest tools in this moment. He reminded himself that he had faced challenges before and had found ways to navigate them carefully and wisely. Finally, the officer paused and looked at Marcus differently. There was a moment, brief but noticeable, when the intensity of the questioning softened slightly. It was not complete relief, not yet, but a small shift that Marcus noticed immediately. He continued to speak politely, keeping his voice steady, making sure every movement was deliberate and visible. Marcus realized something important. This stop, which began as a minor inconvenience, had revealed a larger truth about the world around him. It had shown him that even routine situations could expose deeper issues, like bias and unfair treatment. And while the encounter was stressful and unsettling, Marcus also understood that how he responded could make a difference, not just for himself, but for others who might face similar situations in the future. By the end of the stop, Marcus felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve. He had maintained his composure, answered every question truthfully, and navigated a tense situation with care. But more than that, he had seen firsthand the subtle ways in which people could be judged differently, treated unfairly, or assumed guilty without cause. The experience left a mark on him, a reminder that vigilance, awareness, and calm courage were essential in moments of uncertainty. As Marcus finally drove away, he took a deep breath and glanced at the rearview mirror. The officer watched him go, and Marcus felt a mixture of relief and lingering tension. The traffic stop had ended, but the lessons it offered and the feelings it stirred would stay with him. He thought about his children, his community, and the importance of speaking up when things felt wrong. Though it was just one encounter on a normal day, Marcus realized that it carried meaning far beyond that afternoon. It was a glimpse into larger patterns, a small moment that reflected broader truths, and a reminder of the need for awareness and courage in everyday life. After the traffic stop, Marcus drove slowly home, his mind racing with questions he could not easily answer. Even though the immediate tension had passed, a sense of unease lingered like a shadow. He replayed every moment in his head: the officer's sharp glances, the sudden questions, the way he had been asked about his friends and past interactions. Something about the stop felt different from what he had experienced before, and he realized that it was not just the stress of being pulled over. There was something deeper, something unfair, that he could feel even though he couldn't yet fully name it. At home, Marcus took a moment to settle. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant laughter of children playing in the neighborhood. His own children were at school, and the silence gave him space to think. He went to his desk, opened his laptop, and began to write down everything that had happened during the stop. He wanted to remember the exact details while they were fresh in his mind: the questions, the timing, the way the officer had looked at him. Writing it down felt like a small act of control, a way to take back some power after a situation that had felt so out of control. As he wrote, Marcus realized he was not just recording events, he was seeing patterns. The way the officer had spoken, the questions he had asked, the judgment in his tone, all of it pointed to something larger than a routine traffic stop. It was as if Marcus had been singled out for reasons beyond the law, and the thought made him both angry and determined. He knew that he needed to understand more, to find a way to see the situation clearly, without letting emotion cloud his judgment. Marcus decided to take action. He began researching online, looking for information about how traffic stops were handled in different communities. He read articles, watched videos, and found reports of similar experiences. Slowly, a picture began to form. Many people, particularly people of color, reported being treated differently during traffic stops. Some were questioned more aggressively, while others were assumed guilty or untrustworthy. Marcus realized that his experience was not unique. It was part of a broader pattern that had been documented but often went unnoticed by the general public. While researching, Marcus also found practical advice for documenting encounters with law enforcement. He learned about recording the stop, taking notes immediately afterward, and keeping a record of interactions. He thought back to the recent stop and wished he had recorded it. Still, he reminded himself that what mattered now was taking careful, measured steps to understand the situation and protect himself in the future. The next day, Marcus decided to speak with a trusted friend who worked in the legal field. He called her, explained what had happened, and shared his notes. She listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about the stop and the officer's behavior. After hearing everything, she nodded. "Marcus," she said, "it sounds like you were treated unfairly. You did everything right by staying calm and cooperative. But it's important to document this kind of encounter, because it can help show patterns of bias and protect you if something similar happens again." Her words gave Marcus a new sense of purpose. He realized that the traffic stop, while stressful and upsetting, could also be an opportunity. By carefully documenting his experience, he could contribute to a larger understanding of how bias affected daily life. He felt a mix of frustration and resolve. Frustration because no one should have to be singled out for reasons beyond their control, and resolve because he now knew he could take steps to make a difference. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began paying closer attention to the world around him. He noticed small, subtle instances of bias that he had previously overlooked. A cashier assuming he couldn't afford an item. A neighbor staring suspiciously when he walked past. A teacher looking at him differently during a school meeting. None of these were dramatic events, but when added together, they painted a clear picture. Marcus realized that bias was not always loud or obvious. It often appeared in small, quiet ways that could shape a person's day and affect their sense of safety and dignity. Marcus also began talking to friends and colleagues about his experience. At first, he was hesitant, unsure how people would react. But he was surprised to find that many had similar stories. Some had experienced unfair treatment at work, others in public spaces, and still others had faced challenges when interacting with law enforcement. Sharing their experiences created a sense of connection and validation. Marcus realized that these stories, when told together, could have power. They could raise awareness, show patterns, and encourage change. One afternoon, Marcus attended a community meeting about local policing. He listened to residents share their experiences, concerns, and suggestions. Many spoke about feeling unsafe, mistrusted, or unfairly targeted. Marcus noticed how similar their experiences were to his own, even if the details differed. The meeting gave him both hope and determination. Hope because he saw people coming together to address issues, and determination because he realized that change required active participation, awareness, and courage. Marcus also began thinking about how to protect himself in future encounters. He purchased a small notebook to carry in his car, where he could quickly write down details of any traffic stops or other interactions. He practiced speaking calmly and clearly, imagining how he would respond if a situation became tense. He thought carefully about how to remain polite and cooperative while also standing up for his rights. These preparations gave him a sense of control, a way to manage situations that previously had left him feeling powerless. Meanwhile, the memory of the traffic stop stayed with him. He could not shake the feeling of being singled out, of being treated differently for reasons beyond his control. But he also recognized the importance of turning that experience into action. He thought about writing an article, speaking at community meetings, or sharing his story online. He wanted others to understand that even small, everyday encounters could reveal larger issues. And he wanted people to know that staying calm, documenting events, and speaking up could make a difference. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to notice subtle changes in himself. He felt more aware of the world around him, more observant of interactions that others might overlook. He noticed the way people responded to authority, the assumptions they made, and the patterns that repeated over time. He also felt a growing sense of responsibility. If he could see these patterns, others could too. And by sharing his experiences, he could help others recognize unfair treatment and take steps to protect themselves. One evening, Marcus sat down with his laptop again. He opened a blank document and began to write a detailed account of the traffic stop. He described the officer's behavior, his own actions, and the feelings he experienced throughout. He included the small details, the way the officer's eyes moved, the questions he asked, and the subtle judgments he felt. He also reflected on the larger lessons he had learned about bias, fairness, and the importance of staying calm in difficult situations. As he wrote, Marcus realized that the process itself was empowering. By turning his experience into words, he could organize his thoughts, understand his emotions, and create a record that could be used for learning and advocacy. Writing became a way to reclaim control, to make sense of a situation that had initially left him feeling powerless. And he knew that this record could help others understand the subtle ways in which bias could affect everyday life. Marcus also began thinking about the future. He considered joining local groups focused on fairness and accountability, attending workshops about community safety, and speaking with others who had similar experiences. He knew that change would not happen overnight, but he felt determined to contribute in whatever way he could. He realized that the traffic stop, while stressful and unfair, had sparked a journey of awareness, reflection, and action that could ultimately make a positive difference. By the end of part 3, Marcus had transformed his initial fear and frustration into a sense of purpose. He understood that encounters like the traffic stop were not just about individual experiences, they were windows into broader societal patterns. And he recognized that through careful observation, documentation, and thoughtful action, he could help bring attention to these patterns and encourage change. Marcus still felt anger and discomfort when he thought about the stop, but he also felt hope and determination. He knew that he had the power to respond wisely, to share his story, and to support others in recognizing unfair treatment. And while he could not control every encounter or eliminate bias from the world, He could control his own actions, his own awareness, and his own voice. The traffic stop had started as a small, everyday event. But for Marcus, it had become a turning point, a moment that revealed injustice, challenged him to remain calm under pressure, and inspired him to take action. It was a lesson in courage, awareness, and the importance of speaking up, even in situations where doing so felt difficult or uncomfortable. Marcus knew that simply reflecting on the traffic stop was not enough. Writing down his experience and understanding the patterns of bias gave him clarity, but he wanted more. He wanted to do something that could create real change. The incident had opened his eyes to a reality he could no longer ignore, and he felt a strong responsibility to act not just for himself, but for others who might face similar situations in the future. He began by reaching out to local community organizations that focused on justice, fairness, and police accountability. Marcus spent hours researching groups in his city, reading their mission statements, attending webinars, and contacting organizers. He learned about advocacy programs, community safety initiatives, and legal support networks. Each organization had its own approach, but all shared a common goal: to ensure that people were treated fairly and to raise awareness about systemic bias. After careful consideration, Marcus decided to volunteer with one of the organizations that helped document and report police interactions. They encouraged residents to share their experiences, create detailed accounts, and submit them to a centralized database. This database would help identify patterns of bias over time and provide evidence for advocacy and policy change. Marcus felt this was a perfect fit. His detailed notes from the traffic stop could now become part of a larger effort to address unfair treatment. He attended his first meeting with the organization, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. The room was filled with people from all walks of life: parents, students, professionals, and retirees, all united by a shared concern for fairness and justice. Each person shared their own story, and Marcus listened closely. Some stories were familiar to him, echoing the feelings he had experienced during the traffic stop. Others were new and surprising, revealing the many ways bias could appear in everyday life. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus described his encounter calmly and clearly. He explained how the officer had pulled him over, the questions he had asked, and the subtle assumptions that made him feel singled out. He also shared how the experience had motivated him to take action. As he spoke, he noticed nods of understanding and empathy from the group. Marcus felt a sense of connection and validation. He realized that he was not alone and that his experience could contribute to a larger effort to create awareness and change. After the meeting, Marcus worked with the organization to submit his account to their database. He carefully reviewed his notes, double-checked the timeline, and made sure all details were accurate. The process was meticulous, but he understood its importance. By creating a clear and detailed record, Marcus could ensure that his experience was taken seriously and that it could help demonstrate patterns of unfair treatment over time. As Marcus continued to engage with the organization, he began attending workshops on community advocacy and legal rights. He learned about how to interact with law enforcement safely, how to document incidents, and how to advocate for policy changes. The workshops were informative and empowering. Marcus realized that knowledge was a powerful tool. By understanding his rights and the legal framework, he could navigate encounters more confidently and support others who faced similar challenges. At the same time, Marcus started thinking about ways to share his story more broadly. He considered writing an article for a local newspaper, speaking at community events, and using social media to raise awareness. He knew that many people might not realize the subtle ways in which bias affected daily life. By sharing his story publicly, he could help others recognize these patterns and encourage collective action. One evening, Marcus drafted a personal essay about the traffic stop. He described the events in simple, clear language, emphasizing the feelings he had experienced: fear, confusion, and frustration, while also highlighting the steps he had taken to respond calmly and responsibly. He wrote about the importance of documenting encounters, staying aware, and advocating for fairness. The essay was heartfelt, honest, and powerful. Marcus felt a sense of purpose as he typed the final words. The next day, Marcus shared his essay with the organization, and they encouraged him to submit it to a local publication. After careful editing and review, the essay was published online and in the community newsletter. Marcus was nervous at first. Sharing a personal experience publicly can be intimidating, especially when it involves sensitive issues like bias and police behavior. But he also felt proud. His story had the potential to reach others, to validate their experiences, and to inspire action. The response was immediate. People from the community reached out to Marcus, thanking him for sharing his story. Some shared their own experiences, expressing relief that someone else had faced similar challenges. Others asked questions about how to document interactions or how to engage with advocacy organizations. Marcus realized that his story had opened a door for conversation, understanding, and connection. It was no longer just his experience, it had become part of a larger dialogue about fairness and justice. As Marcus continued to share his story and engage with the community, he noticed small changes in the way people talked about bias and police interactions. Conversations that had once been private and whispered now became open and public. People felt more confident discussing their experiences, asking questions, and seeking solutions. Marcus understood that change often starts with awareness, and awareness grows through sharing, listening, and community engagement. Marcus also continued to reflect on his own experiences and emotions. He recognized that confronting bias and unfair treatment could be exhausting and emotionally challenging. Some days, he felt anger, sadness, or frustration. But he also felt a sense of resilience and empowerment. By taking action, he could transform negative experiences into opportunities for growth, learning, and advocacy. One afternoon, Marcus was invited to speak at a local community event about his experience and the work of the advocacy organization. He prepared carefully, thinking about how to communicate his story clearly and effectively. When the day arrived, he spoke confidently to a room filled with residents, educators, and local officials. He shared the traffic stop, the feelings it had stirred, and the steps he had taken to document, reflect, and engage with the community. His words resonated with the audience. Many nodded, some took notes, and others approached him afterward to ask questions or share their own experiences. The event reinforced Marcus's belief that individual experiences could spark collective change. He realized that sharing his story publicly was not just about him, it was about creating understanding, inspiring action, and encouraging others to speak up. He also understood that advocacy required persistence, patience, and dedication. Change might not happen overnight, but consistent effort and engagement could make a real difference over time. Over the following months, Marcus continued to participate in community initiatives, workshops, and discussions. He collaborated with others to develop educational materials, host awareness campaigns, and provide guidance on documenting interactions with law enforcement. His efforts were not always easy. There were setbacks, disagreements, and moments of frustration. But Marcus remained committed. He knew that meaningful change often required perseverance and resilience. At the same time, Marcus maintained his focus on his personal life. He balanced community engagement with family responsibilities, work, and self-care. He knew that advocacy and activism were important, but they had to coexist with other aspects of life. By maintaining this balance, Marcus could sustain his efforts over the long term, ensuring that his work remained thoughtful, effective, and compassionate. Through this journey, Marcus discovered something essential about himself. He realized that he was capable of facing challenges, reflecting deeply, and taking thoughtful action. The traffic stop, which had initially felt like a moment of fear and helplessness, had become a catalyst for growth, awareness, and community engagement. Marcus had transformed a difficult personal experience into an opportunity to contribute to a larger cause. By the end of part 4, Marcus had not only shared his story but had also become an active advocate for fairness, awareness, and justice. He had connected with others who shared his concerns, learned valuable skills, and inspired dialogue in his community. His journey demonstrated that even small, personal experiences could have far-reaching impacts when met with courage, reflection, and thoughtful action. Marcus understood that the work was far from over. There were still challenges to face, conversations to have, and patterns of bias to address. But he also knew that he had the knowledge, resilience, and support to continue. The traffic stop had opened his eyes to a reality that many overlooked, and it had shown him the power of awareness, documentation, and community engagement. It had revealed that even moments of injustice could become opportunities for learning, growth, and change. As he prepared for the next community meeting, Marcus felt a sense of purpose. He carried with him the lessons of the traffic stop, the importance of calm, the value of documentation, the power of sharing experiences, and the need for collective action. Each step he took, each story he shared, and each connection he made reinforced his commitment to fairness and justice. Marcus had turned a single, challenging encounter into a journey of empowerment, education, and advocacy that would continue to shape his life and the lives of those around him. Months had passed since the traffic stop that had changed Marcus's life. He had grown in ways he could never have imagined. The incident, which once filled him with fear and anger, had become a turning point, guiding him toward purpose, community, and advocacy. Now, he could see the impact of his efforts, both on himself and on those around him. Marcus continued to engage with the community organization, taking on more responsibility as he grew more confident. He helped organize workshops, mentor new volunteers, and contribute to educational campaigns about fairness and bias. His personal story had become a cornerstone for their outreach programs, demonstrating how one person's experience could inspire collective awareness and change. He felt proud, not because of recognition, but because he could help others understand their rights and navigate challenging situations. One day, the organization received a letter from a local official, acknowledging their work and inviting them to participate in a city-wide initiative to improve community policing. Marcus was excited but also nervous. He had never imagined that his small efforts could reach the level of city planning and influence policy discussions. Nevertheless, he knew this was an opportunity to represent not just himself, but everyone who had experienced bias or unfair treatment. The day of the city meeting arrived, and Marcus prepared carefully. He reviewed notes, rehearsed what he wanted to say, and reminded himself to stay calm and focused. When he entered the council room, he saw people he had met before: activists, educators, and community leaders, all gathered to discuss ways to make the city safer and more just. Marcus felt a mix of anticipation and determination. He knew that the voice of those directly affected by bias was crucial in shaping meaningful policies. When Marcus spoke, he began with his traffic stop story, describing it clearly and honestly, without anger or exaggeration. He focused on the lessons he had learned and the steps he had taken to respond responsibly. He highlighted the importance of documentation, awareness, and community engagement. He also shared how the organization's support had helped him turn a negative experience into positive action. His words were thoughtful, measured, and compelling. The response from the council and the audience was encouraging. Several officials nodded, took notes, and asked questions about how the city could implement better training for officers and improve accountability. Members of the community expressed gratitude for Marcus's courage in speaking up and for the work he had done to support others. Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment, not because of personal recognition, but because he could see that his story was making a difference. After the meeting, Marcus continued to work on initiatives that could prevent similar incidents from happening to others. He collaborated with educators to create programs teaching young people about their rights, how to engage safely with law enforcement, and the importance of community advocacy. He also worked with local media to share stories of positive change and raise awareness about bias in everyday life. Marcus realized that education and awareness were powerful tools that could transform fear into confidence and action. At the same time, Marcus maintained his personal life and relationships. He spent time with family and friends, shared his experiences with loved ones, and celebrated small victories along the way. He understood that balance was essential, advocacy was important, but so was self-care and connection. Marcus's life was no longer defined solely by fear or anger, it was defined by purpose, growth, and engagement. One afternoon, Marcus received a message from a young man who had recently experienced a traffic stop similar to his own. The young man was confused, scared, and unsure of how to respond. Marcus took the time to guide him patiently. He explained how to document the encounter, stay calm, and know his rights. He shared his own story to provide encouragement and perspective. By helping this young man navigate a difficult experience, Marcus realized the ripple effect of his actions. His courage and advocacy were not only influencing policy and awareness, but also directly helping individuals in real time. As Marcus continued his work, he noticed changes in the community. People were talking more openly about bias and fairness. Workshops and meetings were more frequently attended, and the younger generation seemed particularly engaged. Local officials were more responsive to concerns, implementing new training programs and accountability measures. Marcus felt a quiet pride in seeing tangible change. He understood that meaningful progress often took time and persistence, but the results were worth the effort. One evening, Marcus reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple traffic stop. He thought about the fear and frustration he had felt, the steps he had taken to document and reflect, and the growth that had followed. The experience had transformed him, shaping his perspective, actions, and sense of responsibility. He realized that challenges, even those that seemed unfair or frightening, could be catalysts for learning, growth, and positive change. Marcus also reflected on the power of community. The organization he had joined, the people he had met, and the relationships he had built had been crucial in his journey. Together, they had created a network of support, knowledge, and advocacy that amplified individual voices and turned personal experiences into collective action. Marcus understood that one person alone could create change, but collaboration multiplied impact. In addition to community work, Marcus took the time to educate himself further about social justice, law, and civil rights. He attended online courses, read books, and participated in discussion groups. The knowledge he gained allowed him to approach challenges with a deeper understanding and provide informed guidance to others. Marcus knew that continuous learning was essential, not just for personal growth, but also for effective advocacy. Over time, Marcus became a mentor to new volunteers, sharing his experiences, insights, and strategies for community engagement. He emphasized the importance of calm reflection, clear documentation, and empathy. He encouraged others to turn their experiences into opportunities for awareness and action. Through mentoring, Marcus realized that his journey was not just about his own growth, it was about helping others navigate challenges and find their voice. Marcus also explored creative ways to raise awareness about bias and fairness. He collaborated with local artists to create public displays highlighting stories of resilience and advocacy. He contributed to educational videos, podcasts, and social media campaigns that reached a wider audience. Through these projects, Marcus's message extended beyond his immediate community, inspiring conversations and reflection in neighboring cities and online networks. Despite all the progress, Marcus remained humble and grounded. He knew that addressing bias and unfair treatment was an ongoing process. Challenges and setbacks would continue to arise, and not every effort would yield immediate results. But Marcus had learned that persistence, reflection, and collaboration were key to meaningful change. He remained committed to his principles and to the people he served. One day, Marcus was invited to speak at a regional conference on community safety and advocacy. Standing on the stage, looking out at hundreds of attendees, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. He shared his story, the steps he had taken to engage with the community, and the lessons he had learned about courage, reflection, and advocacy. His words resonated deeply with the audience. Many approached him afterward, expressing gratitude and sharing their own experiences. Marcus realized that his journey had become a source of inspiration far beyond his local community. As he returned home that evening, Marcus reflected on the journey from the traffic stop to the conference stage. The incident that had once filled him with fear had become a catalyst for growth, education, and community engagement. He thought about the young man he had helped, the workshops he had led, the policy discussions he had contributed to, and the people he had inspired. Marcus understood that even small actions, when guided by courage and purpose, could create lasting change. In the quiet of his home, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but he also knew that he had the tools, support, and determination to face them. The traffic stop had taught him lessons that went beyond fear. It had shown him the importance of awareness, documentation, reflection, and action. It had revealed the power of community, the impact of sharing personal experiences, and the potential for meaningful change when individuals and communities work together. Looking forward, Marcus continued to plan new initiatives, workshops, and community programs. He remained committed to mentoring, education, and advocacy. He knew that each story shared, each workshop conducted, and each policy influenced was a step toward a fairer, more understanding society. Marcus had transformed a single, challenging moment into a lifetime of purpose, growth, and impact. The story of the small traffic stop had evolved far beyond a personal encounter. It had become a story of courage, reflection, education, and advocacy. It had shown that even moments of fear and uncertainty could be transformed into opportunities for growth, connection, and change. Marcus had turned a challenging experience into a journey of empowerment, demonstrating that one person's voice, when combined with action and community support, could contribute to a more fair and just world. In the end, Marcus understood a simple but profound truth: challenges in life are not always obstacles, they are opportunities. Opportunities to learn, to grow, to connect, and to create positive change. The traffic stop had been his challenge, but it had also been the beginning of his journey toward purpose, advocacy, and lasting impact. Marcus had faced fear, reflected deeply, taken action, and inspired others. His journey continued, but the lessons he had learned and the change he had inspired would continue to resonate far beyond that one small traffic stop.